We're good to start.
Great. Hi, everyone. A warm welcome. I hope everyone can hear all right. Great to see so many of you join the call already. My name is Sophie Rigg, and I'm the strategy lead for the Mobilising an Earth Governance Alliance, and I'm also the co-chair of the Climate Action Network UK. And I'm joining you from a very sweaty New York, where I'm based. I have to admit, I feel like I'm in the climate change pressure cooker here in New York. I'm not sure if others in New York, such as Malcolm, also feel the same this summer. But I think that the world over, we've very much feeling it this year and a scary sense of foreboding. But I think today is also about hope and action. And the discussion today is titled Climate Protection, Faith and the Rights of Future Generations, Opportunities from the pending climate case in the International Court of Justice. But before we begin, just maybe two quick words on the Mobilising an Earth Governance Alliance for those of you that are new to our work. So at the Alliance, we recognise that today's institutions are failing to meet the scale and urgency of the planetary crisis. And we work very much to address this by driving transformative reforms in global environmental governance. And we do this through smart coalitions and political strategies that turn bold ideas into actionable change. Now, the focus of today's discussion, the ICJ advisory opinion, is an inspiration to us at the Alliance and provides our team with hope on what can be achieved when bold ideas are met with coordinated action and an astute political strategy. Now, before we get into all of this in more detail, just a couple of housekeeping points. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat, and please also post your questions in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring the Q&A as we go along, and we want this to be very much an interactive discussion, and there'll be lots of time for questions, so please do keep them coming. The discussion will run for about an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes, and we'll break it down into two panels. So yeah, please do put your questions and keep them coming in the Q&A. Now, we're meeting today on the eve of the historic release of the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the responsibility of states with regard to climate change. Now, the idea for the ICJ advisory opinion was initiated by a group of Pacific Island law students and youth activists from Vanuatu, who launched a bold campaign to clarify states' legal obligations on climate change under international law. And we're really lucky to have on the panel today representatives from Vanuatu and World's Youth for Climate Justice, as well as lawyers that have worked very closely in this space. Now, the campaign that came from Vanuatu led to the UN General Assembly adopting a historic resolution in March 2023, requesting the ICJ to deliver an opinion on the state's duties to protect the climate system and the legal consequences of causing harm. And this drew on submissions from, I think, 96 states and around 11 international bodies. But what's important to highlight here is that the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice, set to be released tomorrow, is a really powerful example of how we can use the tools of international law in bold and creative ways to reframe how the world deals with climate change. And it isn't just a legal milestone. It's a strategic move to strengthen accountability, elevate ambition, and put justice at the heart of global climate governance. And while the opinion itself is a critical step, it's not the final word. It's the start of a next phase where all of us here today have a role to play in making sure it's implemented, used, and acted on. And that's very much what today's discussion is also about. It's about how we move from opinion to action and impact. So today's discussion is brought to you by the Mobilising an Earth Governance Alliance and the World Federalist Movement Interfaith Working Group. It's also co-sponsored by the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, the Basel Peace Office, the World Future Council, the Impact Coalition on Strengthening International Judicial Institutions, 7 at the University of Amsterdam Climate Institute, and the World's Youth for Climate Justice. So clearly we've got a lot of momentum to build on here when we're thinking about our collective role in implementing the ICJ advisory opinion. So I think we're off to a good start. Now, we have a really great group of panelists that come from political, legal, and youth perspectives, among others. And as I said, we want to keep this discussion as interactive as possible, and thus have divided the panels into two. We'll have a first round and then a short moment for Q&A, followed by a second panel with much more time for Q&A. So please do keep your questions coming. But before I introduce the first panel and hand over to them, I'll briefly hand over to Alan Ware. He's the Programme Director for the Mobilising an Earth Governance Alliance, and he'll provide us with a bit of an overview of the sister webinar to this one that happened earlier today. So Alan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. And I wear a couple of hats as well as being with the World Federalist Movement and Mobilising an Earth Governance Alliance. I'm also with the World Future Council and the Basel Peace Office, and they're all being involved in not just this initiative, but in the campaign and the issue. And this webinar now is session 2 of a 2-session webinar. Session 1 was earlier today, and it was timed for participants from Asia and the Pacific. And today is timed more for the Americas, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. But of course, if people get up early in Europe, they can go to the Asia Pacific one. And I know there's also a few people from Asia Pacific who've decided to come onto this one as well. Some, I think, inspired by the event that we had earlier today. But this is part of what this issue is. It's a global issue. And so it's really important to engage people from everywhere. And that's something which Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change started by building this coalition of youth, World Youth for Climate Justice. And it's something which Vanuatu, as the lead in taking the UN General Assembly resolution, made sure that they were engaging with countries and communities from around the world, because climate change is affecting everybody. So we also want to ensure that we can engage people, which is why we had sessions at different times for the different time zones. So very quickly, we have 5 wonderful speakers in the morning. Vishal Prasad, who's the Director of Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change, and one of the core team members of World Youth for Climate Justice, who gave the background to how the initiative was built together, from the Pacific in the beginning, then taken out to the rest of the world, and also what World Youth for Climate Justice are looking at doing tomorrow at the court. But we'll hear a little bit more about this also from Henrika. We had Professor Emily Gaillard from New Caledonia, Professor of International Law, with an expertise in the rights of future generations. And this is something which is going to be explored a lot, and we hope there'll be a lot of development on the rights of future generations taken forward in the decision tomorrow by the International Court of Justice. The rights of future generations are not just about the future, they're also about now. It's about intergenerational justice. That's really probably the better term about it. And you see a lot of that in both the questions that are asked of the court, the questions from the UN General Assembly framed by Vanuatu and the core team, talk about human rights for current and future generations. So this is really interesting. It's a developing body of law and such an important body of law protecting future generations. Then we have Philippa Rowland, who's Chair of Religions for Peace Australia, really looking at how the multi-faith community are engaging in these ideas of litigation, using the law, the intersections between principles of faith and principles of law, and the strong connections between those. Followed by Dr. Michelle Maloney, who's the co-founder of Australian Earth Laws Alliance. And it was very much looking at the law that we're looking at is not just about protecting humans, about protecting ecosystems, and that we are part of ecosystems. And then we also had Athena Peralta from the World Council of Churches, who has, in the World Council of Churches, has developed a handbook on litigation for faith-based communities. So there will be, the recording that is available, and we'll make that available to all the participants here after the event. And that's just to give a little feeling of what was happening there. And now we're looking forward to handing back to Sophie to take forward this session. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. Great. Well, now I'll introduce our 3 panelists in our first panel round. So we have Malcolm Dalesa, who's the climate attaché at the Mission of Vanuatu to the United Nations in New York. We have Henrique Bunga, if I'm saying that correctly. I did practice, but I think I've still got it wrong, who's the Europe Front Coordinator for World Youth for Climate Justice. And we have Renee Gift, who's the legal officer at the United Nations Environment Programme. So I'll first hand over to you, Malcolm, to provide some opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Sophie. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Good evening, good morning, wherever you're joining from. I'm very much honored and pleased to be part of this panel, and very much would like to thank the organizers, the alliance, the movement, the networks, to be part of this. very esteemed panel, and I would like to kick things off with some very broad general remarks. According to UNICEF's Today and Tomorrow initiative report, and I believe it was last year's report, it highlights how escalating cyclone intensity and frequency are impacting children across a number of countries, particularly in their first 10 years of their lives. And children are being exposed to multiple severe storms during their crucial development stages. And this is very much the lived reality for our children, the children of Vanuatu, where it has become the norm for children to encounter Category 4 or 5 cyclones within the very much early years of their lives. And while I speak, a good number of our children are still studying under temporary tents or shelters. And I can recall back to 2020 when we had Cyclone Harold, Category 5 cyclone that hit the country, and we're still recovering. And after that, a series of other Category 4 or 5 cyclones. And that has very much put added pressure on particularly children, where now their learning environment is one that is not conducive for proper and effective learning. And I can go more about all the range of the different rights that are being infringed. But this climate crisis is depriving them of their rights and ability to grow healthy, thrive, and survive. And yet, even as Vanuatu and other small island developing states face perilous threats from rising seas, intensifying cyclones, and cascading climate damages that drain our limited resources, and even a Category 4 or 5 cyclone will set us back as far as 50% or 60% of our GDP, and not to mention the displacement of our communities. So even facing those array of devastating impacts, small island developing states continue to lead the global fight for climate justice. We continue to raise the urgent need for global climate action and accountability. And at this point, I would like to acknowledge and commend the bold and courageous step taken by our youth from the Pacific and globally to challenge the status quo, to challenge the current establishment, and to seek an advisory opinion from the world's highest court. So now we gather on the eve of what we see as a seismic shift in international climate regime. We stand at the threshold of what will be a watershed moment in our collective fight for climate justice. And tomorrow, the International Court of Justice will speak with clarity and moral authority on what we, Vanuatu and other small island developing states, have known for so long, that this climate change is not just an environmental challenge, it is a fundamental threat to human rights and international law. So this advisory opinion will validate the voices of the most vulnerable amongst us and transform our legal understanding of climate obligations. It will establish the climate crisis that the climate crisis demands immediate and ambitious action rooted in international law, and most importantly, human dignity. So for Vanuatu and other small island developing states and other climate vulnerable countries, this ruling will, in a big way, represent hope. Hope that our islands, our people, our future will no longer be drowned out in the face of rising seas and intensifying storms. The court will recognize that climate inaction is not just irresponsible, it violates our fundamental rights. And for Vanuatu, we will explore every avenue, from social, political, legal, to turn this opinion into transformative action. And we see it as a moral imperative that we all embrace this moment as an opportunity to accelerate climate action, honor legal obligations, and build a world where no community will have to face the existential threat of climate displacement. The path forward, as we see it, is very clear. Ambitious emissions reductions, enhanced adaptation action, and unwavering commitment to climate justice across all sectors of society. And the climate crisis hits hardest the most vulnerable within our global community. And we will need to bring to bear that our disposal, including international law, to tackle this sternest test yet of climate change. Our concerted and collective efforts must raise ambition and accountability for a just, sustainable, and inclusive future for all. And this is very important, especially for our children and our youth. I thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm, for a very sobering reminder of the vast and deep impacts of climate change across everything from education to human rights and GDP and displacement, and about clearly this moment of hope and this seismic shift that we are hopefully entering into. Thank you very much. Henrique, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sophie, and also Alan for the introduction, and to Malcolm for highlighting some of the issues that we are here to discuss. Thank you also for everyone attending today. Again, my name is Henrique, and Sophie's pronunciation was perfectly fine. I'm here today to represent World Youth for Climate Justice. As mentioned, I'm the European coordinator, but most importantly also to emphasize the youth angle on the importance in this case. As has been mentioned before, right, this was an endeavor that was spearheaded by 27 law students from the University of the South Pacific who really sought out the legal pathways and wanted to fight for what they believe is right, their right, and to clarify that this is a global endeavor that has to be clarified by the world's highest court. So yes, What's Youth for Climate Justice was sort of founded upon this endeavor as well, to take this message into the world and make sure that as many states as possible align behind this endeavor. And yeah, I'd like to maybe give a brief overview first, a little bit on how we got here and what has happened, and sort of then dive into what we can expect maybe tomorrow and in the upcoming months. And I think most importantly here is also to emphasize for my fellow young people or whoever associates themselves with the youth as well, that what we realized in this fight is that when we joined our forces is that we're all one in this together, and we're facing a global emergency that knows no borders, right? There's no government and there is no institution that can stand itself apart. So we as youth decided to rise up, and not in isolation, but in unity, to stand side by side and fight this fight together, as we are stronger in numbers and making our voices heard. So we demanded that the world's highest court affirm what science, communities, and our hearts already know, is that climate justice is a human right, that delaying climate actions is not like a political move or a neutral action, but it is harmful and detrimental to people, to nature, and to communities all around the world, threatening our very existence on this planet. So we fought, and we will continue to fight, to emphasize that this opinion must mark the turning points towards shared, bold, and responsible climate action. So because climate crisis is a global crisis, the cooperation among states is really essential in this. And as we all know, there are difficulties in international negotiations, and its progress seems also very slow. That's why it was also so remarkable that thanks to the efforts of all the young people, the request for this advisory opinion was unanimously adopted at the United Nations General Assembly. And for those of you who may not know, are not familiar super with the case, an advisory opinion is not a case per se where a state is suing another state, but it is a request for an interpretation of the existing legal obligations of states. And the two questions that were posed to the court by Vanuatu were, for one, what the existing legal obligations are that states are holding, and also in the case of states not living up to these obligations, what the legal consequences can be. So this really allows to address the ambiguities in how international legal instruments may apply to the climate issues, and also hopes to clarify sort of the concrete avenues that people can seek in order to fight for climate justice. So what we saw also is that during the written and also oral submissions, which have taken place over the course of the past year, there was an unprecedented level of participation of countries. Also, again, would really like to credit the young people who have fought and dedicatedly advocated for state participation in this endeavor to make this a truly historic case and to seek this once in a generation opportunity. So what we saw during the written submissions was also sort of some of the states' standpoint on specific issues, which, some were obviously much more progressive than others, and it really allowed us to get an understanding of where urgent action is needed in the coming months. But before we go into that, where we are currently standing is, on the eve of the adoption of the third of 3 advisory opinions. In fact, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea has already published its advisory opinion on states' obligations on climate change under the Law of the Sea. And also the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has recently published its advisory opinion on similar questions. And all of these were very important opinions by where these courts clarified, for one, in the ITLOS, for example, that greenhouse gas emissions are a form of marine pollution. And the Inter-American Court even going further in stating that, the obligation to prevent irreversible environmental harm and climate change is an imperative norm of international law that all states have to adhere to. So these were really strong and defining moments already that we hope that the ICJ will build on tomorrow. And all of these endeavors have also strongly been pushed and informed by young people who have shared their opinions, and also PISFCC and WICJ making their own submissions to these cases, really utilizing all the networks and the platform that we've created to voice our opinions on these matters and shape the endeavors of these advisory opinions. So what is sort of important going forward now is that the International Court of Justice can issue like a monumental opinion, which not just broadens the climate obligations of many states, but really just emphasizes that this is nothing new. Like, these obligations have been standing. This is something that states have been obliged to, just being part of a global community. And this is the seeking of legal clarity in this regard is really important to prevent further delaying of action and take meaningful climate action now, given that, as Malcolm also, of course, so nicely addressed before, that there are rights already being affected, right? There are children, women, and elderly in particular, who are already facing the devastating consequences of the climate crisis. And this is a crucial moment to emphasize principles of fairness, of responsibility, but also of accountability. It will be a critical moment to clarify also the potential tools available to seek accountability from polluters, and not to create new laws, but really emphasize the bindingness of the human rights obligations, which are being unthreatened by the climate crisis. So what we hope to see tomorrow is, an an approach of fairness and responsibility and solidarity with the global community and those who are most impacted by the climate crisis. And it is really a crucial tool with a massive potential to hold major emitters accountable. So what we hope to see is new avenues through which we can push forward longstanding issues of justice and slash emissions, for example, but also advance climate justice, loss and damage. There's really a variety of topics to which this advisory opinion will be crucial in its applicability. So what comes next is this exact unpacking of this advisory opinion. After the historic day tomorrow, we really want to see this advisory opinion to be translated broad and far into all aspects of not just the law, but also the practice of governments and policies and NGOs, and for everyone to see how this advisory opinion can be used to advance action on all fronts, be it mitigation or adaptation, or the topics I've mentioned before. So that's also my call to action to you, to first of all join us in this historic moment tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central European time. The court will be delivering its advisory opinion here in The Hague, and we'll have a solidarity demonstration. So for everyone who is able to travel to the Netherlands tomorrow, we will be here in front of the Peace Palace and show our solidarity with the Pacific Island students fighting climate change and the delegation of Vanuatu as well. But also in the upcoming days to really spread the word about this endeavor and reach out to us, work together with us in collaboration to unpack how this can transform action on the ground. And I think the last reminder is also that at the heart of this campaign of young people is really the belief and the trust that you're never too young to change something, and that you do hold agency, especially if you seek out your collective and your community. And this is the course of history that we can truly influence at this moment in time. And if we unite and we stand up together, we can overcome this inaction and we can fight for what is our right. So we are turning to the ICJ now, and it also has the opportunity to rise up to this moment and speak clearly that survival and dignity and justice for present and future generations must urgently be protected. So thank you all for taking the time, and I'm looking forward to engaging with all of you further.
Great, thank you so much. And just, you can feel the power of youth coming through the words. Thank you. And we can get into a little bit more about the next steps for the youth movement, maybe in the Q&A. But over to you now, Renee, and I believe you would like, brilliant, sharing your screen.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's always difficult to come after some very powerful speakers, and that was really good to hear the perspectives from both. I wanted to talk a little bit today about the role of UNEP on climate change litigation, and to kind of give like a holistic kind of overview of what's been happening. So UNEP since 2017 has been tracking trends in climate litigation, and so we developed a status of climate litigation report in 2017, 2020, and then most recently in 2023, together with the Savin Center for Climate Change Law in the Columbia Law School, which, as many of you know, continuously works on a database and updates a database on climate change litigation. We're working on the 2025 edition, and so this will be an update of the 2023. So I wanted to share with you some kind of figures and facts that we compiled from the 2023 and a little bit of an update from the 2025, which will be launched later this year. And just a quick definition of climate change litigation as used in the report. This refers to cases that raise material issues of law or fact relating to climate change, mitigation, adaptation, or the science of climate change. So it doesn't include cases that seek to accomplish goals related to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, and so on. So just to show that, they are, when the cases are being tracked, there is a limitation to what we look at. So these are the figures from the 2023 report. So You'll see here, so on the left, the total number of climate change cases. And this is the blue in the first 2017, then the 2020 and the 2023 report. And as of June 2025, the cumulative number of cases tracked has gone from 2,180 to 3,099. So a steady increase. And that has increased from 65 jurisdictions to 79. And that includes 55 state jurisdictions and 24 international or regional courts, tribunals, quasi-judicial bodies, and other adjudicatory bodies. And this number comprises, so of the 3,099 as it stands as of June 30th, 2025, this includes 1,113 cases from all other jurisdictions and 1,900 cases from the US. So just to show that this is already a good indication that cases, climate litigation cases worldwide have been steadily increasing. And this has continued throughout 2025, of course. And there has also been an increase in regional representation of cases. So we see that most of the cases still come from the United States of America, but this has been increasing, including through international and regional adjudicatory bodies, as you've heard. And this shows you, it's a little bit difficult to see the other colored jurisdictions, but just to show that the majority of cases are coming from the United States of America, but there are quite a few coming now from other jurisdictions. And this was as of 2020, the end of 2022. This regional distribution has more or less remained the same, where we see that the highest percentage outside of the United States has come from Europe and Oceania, with now today 17%. So South America today at 16.9%, and Asia 6.4%, so very similar, and Africa 2.1%. Now, just to give a little disclaimer here that this does reflect the climate litigation trends that are being tracked in the Sabin Center database, of which they do have a regional network of researchers. So there may be cases that were not included, but I think this is enough to give a kind of overview of what are the trends throughout the world in terms of how many cases have been filed. And I think this is not necessarily, there are many reasons for countries or regions, having more cases than others, that have to do with things, other factors outside of the fact, obviously, that climate change affects some regions more than others. I think that there are many different reasons for this, but it is interesting to see where a lot of these cases are coming from. And so who are these people bringing litigation? Who are these people responsible for bringing litigation in these numbers? And actually, they're women's groups, they're senior citizens groups, they're youth groups, as you've heard, civil society, and people from vulnerable communities, and such as people living in small and developing states, and so on. So it's a wide range of people who are bringing these actions against an also growing body of respondents. And I wanted to sort of highlight some of these trends. So these are trends that have been noted in the most recent reports and will be noted as well in the 2025 report. And I've just picked out a few, there are others. As the report divides the litigation into international climate change litigation and domestic climate change litigation. The international ones being the ones brought in international tribunals and courts. And so one of them includes advisory opinions. So there has been an increase in advisory opinions requests before the courts, as you've heard. And there have been also many climate change cases before international and regional courts and tribunals and other bodies. So we've heard about examples from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the advisory opinion that was recently delivered on climate change. And there's also been, and there's also a case before the African Court on Peoples and Human Rights, where petitioners are also seeking an advisory opinion on African states' human rights obligations in the context of climate change. So really interesting to see that this is something that is extending beyond, the jurisdictions that are most popular. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but just to show how some of these trends are spreading to other jurisdictions that are not known to be litigious or have, that many cases or that much prominent attention on climate change issues. And we've also seen a rise in transnational cases, so cases involving parties from 2 different jurisdictions. So cases that seek to remedy national harm to citizens in one country due to actions from corporations based in another country. So I thought these are a few interesting trends and findings from international climate change litigation. And then the report also goes into looking at how this has been managed. I mean, most of the litigation has been at the domestic or national level, so brought in national courts of countries. And this has been centered around a few, they've been categorized into a few areas, and I just pulled out 4 here. And one very prominent one has been rights-based litigation, so actions asserting that insufficient climate mitigation or adaptation violates plaintiffs' rights. And a vast scope of rights have been claimed in these different types of litigation, including, of course, the right to life, health, food, water, liberty, family life, a healthy environment, a safe climate, but have an impact in addressing climate change. So, and they've been based on constitutional rights, but rights found in national legislation and so on. So the creativity of claimants in how they link these rights or link climate impacts to human rights is also really interesting and has shown a lot of creativity and innovation, and also demonstrates how much climate change affects humans in almost every aspect or fundamental aspect of life. Another area that the report focuses on is domestic enforcement cases, or cases which seek to drive greater ambition on climate change or challenge the commitments made by governments in their national law and how they have or have not been implemented. So just to also take a step back, most of the cases being brought in on the climate change have been targeting governments. But we'll also see that there's been an increasing trend in the recent years also to include corporations in those targets, and how courts have dealt with that has also been something interesting and has been motivating and inspiring similar action in other countries. But the majority has been against governments for what they have or have not done on climate change adaptation and mitigation. One category has also been focused on keeping fossil fuels on the ground, so cases which challenge governments' approvals of carbon-intensive projects or projects' inconsistency with the Paris Agreement or net zero commitments, or cases that seek to protect carbon sinks. And finally, as I mentioned, cases that hold major GHG emitters and fossil fuel companies accountable for climate-related harm. So just moving forward, I think just to some key takeaways, there were many, but I tried to kind of fit them all in there. But the urgency of climate crisis is clearly driving action in civil society. So in the 2024 emissions gap report of UNEP, it was noted that countries largely remain off track in meeting the Paris Agreement goals. And there's a closing window of opportunity to change this. And I think that urgency is driving civil society around the world to come up with different ways to encourage countries to become more ambitious on climate change. I also think that it's also a good indication that, you know, and this is also why this is of interest to UNEP, because in the law division, one of the key areas that we're looking at is supporting the development of environmental rule of law in countries. And that includes ensuring that citizens and civil society have access to justice. And I think that this is a really good indication of the fact that around the world, citizens or civil society have access to justice on climate issues, which is a really important indicator of a functioning democracy. And then international courts and tribunals, as you've heard, have created an opportunity for individuals to assert claims where national systems fall short. So where civil society or claimants don't feel that national systems are working, you know, whether it's the judicial system or the legal framework, they have turned to international courts and they are providing redress in ways that are still fundamental to changing how countries see their obligations. And as mentioned, governments are increasingly subject to challenge on the commitments being made or how these commitments are being put into practice. And now that has expanded to the private sector in and making them accountable. And I think this is really important also because, again, vulnerable people or, you know, individuals now against big corporations, we're seeing a kind of rebalancing of power in society. And I think this has been the fact that that these judicial avenues have been giving these actors a sense of empowerment is a really interesting turn in terms of the role of I guess actors that have historically been seen as victims or passive, you know, passively involved in climate change, not because of their intentions, but because of just the power dynamics. And I think that it's really noteworthy that SIDS are now driving action on climate change. You know, I think SIDS have historically been very good at advocating for greater ambition on climate change, and they have been powerful, but their voices, as loud as they have been, have also been small. And now that we see SIDS in a really powerful role of driving the understanding of international law on climate change and possibly changing international norms and on how states are responsible for climate change. I think this is such a turn of roles, you know, in terms of the power dynamics, that I think it's really noteworthy to mention. And then also transjudicial dialogues are shaping climate litigation. So, you know, I think the idea that litigation in one country is now driving on motivating litigation in another country, and then motivating litigation at the international level is not something that has really happened before in other areas of case law. You know, usually citizens have to use in the courts, the national courts of countries, you focus on case law from emanating from that country and from those courts. But now increasingly this litigation is driving action in other countries and jurisdictions, which it's a really interesting development, but also shows that climate change and the impacts of climate change are very common across countries. I mean, the way that, again, it impacts humans and the environment it's very easily applicable across countries, and it shows how fundamental this issue and these impacts are to human beings. And then the use of scientific evidence and attribution science has been growing. So plaintiffs that want to link emissions, policy and actions, or corporate conduct to climate risks maybe better positioned to overcome admissibility challenges and support claims of state or corporate responsibility. So this really looks at how like science and scientific evidence has used to prove harm and to contribute to the development of legal thresholds. And finally, I think this is a repeat, but just that, or it bears repeating that, this is a really interesting development, the fact that the private sector has been drawn into this, and the scales of power are rebalancing a bit. So I think I will leave that there, and thank you for your attention. Oh, sorry, I think it is also really worth mentioning. I thought about this when Henrique, you were speaking, and you really focused on solidarity. That as a lawyer, I don't think that there are other, I've heard other, non-lawyers really talk about case law and litigation as much as they have climate litigation. So this has really been a convening issue for, I think, all of civil society, lawyers, non-lawyers, and I think that this is very unique of climate litigation. People all over the world now are talking about what happened in the courts in this country and that country, and this has really mobilized and convened all different kinds of people and empowered them to also take action in their different ways. So I leave it there.
Thank you so much, Renee. Hugely rich presentation and fascinating to see the trends. And maybe I'll start actually with a question to you, Renee, and please just a reminder to everyone else to please put questions in the chat as well. And we'll have a quick round of questions for this panelist and then move on to the second panel and then have lots more time for questions. But maybe, Renee, I suppose my question, if I was to be a little bit of a devil's advocate, I think it's amazing and very hopeful, obviously, this sort of shift in power dynamics, the changes in trends in terms of the numbers of cases that are being brought towards the court across all different types of areas of the law and across different sort of jurisdictions. But for example, you see, as you described in the US, that's where most of these cases are being held. And yet in the US at the moment, we have an administration that's been elected that is fervently anti-action on climate change. So where do you see the sort of relationship maybe between increased the law being used as a tool for accountability and redress, and then where the political backlash may be? Do you see it as a political backlash or not? And maybe to rephrase the question in a different way, could you speak maybe a little bit more to the outcomes in a tangible sense of these legal cases? Are we seeing changes in behavior at the government level, within corporates, or across other levels? Or at the moment, are we still in a sort of seeing a shift in narrative and trends, but yet to see that like shift in the actual behaviors?
Well, I think like I often hear, and it's true, that the law is slow. So I think, yes and no. I think we have been seeing, there have been many examples of cases that have resulted in the governments having to develop legislation or to stop projects that would have too much impact on the environment, and reduce in order to reduce carbon emissions, for example. So there have been outcomes of cases like that, and I think when people think about what are the impacts of litigation, I think that's what they seek, right? They seek to learn what have you actually made the government do or made this actor do? And there have been, those kinds of outcomes. But I think like some of the maybe less tangible outcomes, but equally or maybe more important, has been, like I mentioned, the attention that all of this and has put on climate change, and how climate change litigation has really mobilized a large section of society. And so litigation is no longer just being followed by lawyers. People everywhere are following litigation and are using it and feel empowered to take action using the courts at the national and the international levels where they feel that they will achieve more there. So I think that this has been like one of the most important outcomes of this, and also cases that may not necessarily have a kind of tangible result in, you know, forcing this or that actor to take action or to stop action, have also developed our understanding of climate change obligations. And so, as Malcolm and Henrique discussed, you know, what are the implications of some of these advisory opinions? I think when these just started, one big question was always, well, why would we have what's the point of an advisory opinion anyway? What does that change? And I think we've heard from the other panelists how much this means in terms of changing our entire understanding of international law and obligations. So I think, yes, they've been, I think, you know, the United States has a culture of litigation. So I think that, you know, this is one of the reasons why there's a proliferation of cases in that jurisdiction. And probably that will continue, perhaps even more so now with the new administration. And this is what the trends are looking like. But I think that this has been a really useful tool in just bringing attention to the issue. I think that many cases are filed for that reason, just to bring attention, public attention to issues. And I think that has been really successful and really useful to many different stakeholders.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, hugely important, and brings us back to something that Malcolm was saying at the beginning around this seismic shift that we're now at, thanks to not just the ICJ advisory opinion, but the whole body of cases and where the law's been used behind that, as you've described, and that importance of that sort of normative power of the law, and then the importance of narrative. And so maybe, Malcolm, if I can turn to you, and a question maybe to link back to your position in New York at the Vanuatu mission to the United Nations. We have coming up in September UN80. We're obviously at a time of sort of reflection, crisis, and hope for what the UN may become. Where do you see the ICJ opinion having an impact within the conversations on UN80 and the UN General Assembly this year? Do you see a thread coming through in September? Is there something that your mission is sort of thinking about when you're thinking about next steps and linking to UN80 in any way, or just, yeah, any general thoughts from that perspective? Apologies, Malcolm, I can't hear you. Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Apologies for that. Yes, this is very much something that the Vanuatu delegation, the Vanuatu team is looking towards, especially with the high-level week coming up in September. I know from our Minister Ralph, who's been very much at the forefront of this whole campaign, about once the opinion is issued and then having the diplomatic outreach, bilateral talks with different delegation states, as far as, you know, having a deeper understanding of what this advisory opinion entails, and, you know, what we should be looking forward to, especially with working with other states and other delegations, and that'll be happening, you know, within the margins of the UNGA coming up, with the present, you know, going into UNGA 80. There's also plans to get this resolution, or you know, get a resolution to the General Assembly in recognizing the advice as issued by the court. So this is something that's in the pipeline, but I think you mentioned about UN80 itself is this whole initiative to improve how the UN, conducts its business. I think this will, also very much weave into that thread of initiatives or work by which the UN is, embarking on. So I think without having to, get ahead of myself too much, but this is sort of the general direction as far as what we'd like to see. Getting as much as possible a number of states on board to support Vanuatu if it takes this resolution back to the General Assembly in order to adopt a decision and then have that as part of the UN's day-to-day or regular program as far as the implementation of the advisory opinion is concerned. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you. And great to see, obviously, that thread come through with it going back to UNGA later this year as well. Keep that momentum going and see how civil society and other groups can sort of support with that work as well. And maybe something we can talk about a bit more in the Q&A after the second panel. But Henrique, over to you. I mean, a question maybe that I've got is around what sort of youth movements are thinking now. I mean, you spoke a bit about tomorrow and doing a sort of solidarity demonstration and that you're looking ahead to these sort of next steps. But where do you really see the sort of role of youth movements now going forward once the opinion is released?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. It's obviously very difficult to predict the exact contents of the advisory opinion and also how this will inform action going forward. But I think what's most critical is to pursue the continued objective or the message that we've been trying to make clear throughout is that the world is watching and that the youth has very close eyes on how states have interacted and will interact with this advisory opinion, and that we also make sure that we will continue this fight and make sure that the advisory opinion is being implemented and translated into concrete action. So for other youth movements, coming back to my earlier message as well, let's work together, let's unite and re-emphasize each other's causes and help each other out in figuring out how this advisory opinion can push for more ambitions and can be a useful tool for everyone around the world to unite behind more ambitious climate action. So what we're going to do in the next weeks and months, and what our legal analysis team, and I'm sure many from those teams from many other NGOs and governments will do as well, is unpack this advisory opinion and look for sort of the anchor points and the leverage points where we can ask our governments to step up the action that they have been falling short of for so long, and also see how this can be translated into like action in various other international forums, looking at COP30, for example, to really use this as a leverage point to clarify that the international community sort of stands behind these values, and also the world's highest court has clarified that states must act now. So this is sort of the message that we would like to take away and to hopefully inspire everyone with. And once again, an open invitation to reach out to us and to figure this out together in the coming months.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, very important that everyone knows the world is watching. And yeah, I think lots to follow up and collaborate on there going forward. I'll now just turn over to the second panel, but before I do that, I mean, just to note, thank you, Alan has been putting resources in the chat, so please check those out. Please, I now see some more questions coming in, which we will address once we've gone through the second panel. And also, I think our panelists are helpfully answering some of those in the chat as well. But we'll come back to these after we've heard from the second panel. So I'd now like just to introduce the second panel. We have Maya Groff, who is the convener of the Climate Governance Commission and lecturer at the Hague Academy of International Law. We have Dr. Alexander Schmidt, who's the private sector program lead for the Mobilizing in Earth Governance Alliance. And we have Nadia B. Ahmed, who is the associate professor at Barry University School of Law and co-chair of the American Bar Association Environmental Justice Task Force. So thank you very much for also joining us here today. And maybe Maya, if I can hand over to you to kick us off with your opening remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Sophie, and thanks to everyone for joining, and also to the speakers. Already really incredible contributions, and very hopeful, with, however, of course, much work to do. So as Sophie mentioned, I put together and have been leading the Climate Governance Commission for a number of years now, together with Mary Robinson of the Elders, founded by Nelson Mandela, also with Johan Rockstrom, a noted planetary Earth system scientist, and Maria Fernanda Espinosa, former president of the General Assembly, as co-chairs of this commission. And the purpose of the commission is really to look at the climate crisis and then the broader Earth system crisis, destabilization, through this international law and governance lens. And we have a number of proposals, which I'll mention in a moment, which are related to these, the very strong international legal foundations, which we feel that we absolutely need to manage the climate crisis. So we have absolutely supported the World's Youth for Climate Justice from an early stage, and we very deeply congratulate the Pacific Youth, World Youth for Climate Justice, Vanuatu, and all collaborating partners on this really incredible service to the international community. So we're hoping for a strong outcome tomorrow. So in terms of opportunities of the ICJ advisory opinion, firstly, the opinion already is a really strong testament to the way of conducting international affairs, international law, international processes within existing institutions. It's really a vital step to mobilize international law, to bring to bear international law on such a fundamentally important question for all of humanity and for future generations. And of course, the way that this movement to bring us to this, eve of this ICJ advisory opinion has been so exemplary and inspiring in terms of the role of youth, of very, seriously climate vulnerable nations on the front lines. And then together with other voices within the international community, really mobilizing coalitions in the interests of international justice. So in fact, as you probably know, about 130 countries co-sponsored the Vanuatu resolution in the General Assembly, and it was a truly historic, also reference question to the International Court of Justice. So this is really, we hope, in itself, a turning point for the international community, for things to start to shift, for us to start to gravitate towards what is just, what is right, what is equitable, what is based on neutral, universal principles of international law to protect the most vulnerable from powerful actors, and simply from a weak governance system that is not yet addressing these really vital, of course, issues that we're confronting as an international community. And so, of course, we heard earlier the different implication the advisory opinion might have for further international actions and national proceedings and policies. But we also hope that it will be a strong moral compass for future climate action, but also catalyzing a moral compass for the international climate governance that we need to springboard forward from our perspective for the new, the updated, the enhanced international governance we need to tackle these shared challenges. So just a few remarks on some of the proposals that have come out of the Climate Governance Commission that we've been consulting with multiple partners on, and that we hope then to really turbocharge in terms of embrace of a moral majority within the international system to take these forward in the interests of current and future generations. So firstly, we've proposed some kind of declaration at the General Assembly on the unprecedented Earth system risks that we're currently running. It could be framed as a sort of planetary emergency. It could be framed in another way. But I very much like what Malcolm was saying earlier about, how can the United Nations and an UNGA resolution support now the implementation of the opinion and the obligations, responsibilities of the international community for this urgent climate issue? How can this be made day-to-day part of the UN and governance at all levels? And we would also propose that such a UN General Assembly resolution could also be a call to action for and a springboard to really take the next steps in terms of our international governance improvements. So, for example, also updating, improving, strengthening the climate COP process. For example, making science more central, more prominent. Next steps of accountability mechanisms, ongoing accountability mechanisms for the Paris Agreement, what those next steps are, which we have proposals in that respect, amongst others. So these legal obligations should also go to the heart of the climate COPs to inform those and push different obligations there. And then also in terms of next generation proposals, we have made a proposal for a new International Environment Court. And so we hope that the International Court of Justice, AON, along with the other international recent decisions, really helps to make the case that we need some kind of specialized standing judicial body, to defragment current international environmental law, to hold various actors to account, and to fundamentally address this major governance challenge that we have at the moment as a shared challenge. Then lastly, one more proposal which we think that this advisory opinion will buttress and support is moving as an international community to official, more formalized monitoring mechanisms for whole Earth system functionalities. Now we have the different siloed scientific bodies, IPCC reports, etc., which are unbelievably valuable for the international community. But we now also must shift to full Earth system functionality monitoring, biodiversity, oceans, different functionalities, which are very much interdependent, and have these reported out in real time to decision makers at the international level. So, of course, the ICJ hearings have relied heavily on scientific evidence, including IPCC reports. So this is, again, really an important precedent where science, our knowledge base, must lead and inform our governance and justice, and we have to take the urgent measures to protect peoples around the world, vulnerable nations, and everyone really from the worst effects of climate change. So thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Brilliant, Maya, thank you. And yeah, important point around using this turning point to enhance our existing institutions so that they're fit for purpose, and think about these next generation institutions we're going to need to address the crises that we face. Thank you. Alex, can I hand straight over to you to, yeah, thank you.
Yes, happy to. So hi, everyone, also from my side. Very interesting discussion so far. I hope that I can come in with a bit of a different angle. Not a lawyer, but a lot in the kind of private sector space over the last few years. And from this angle, I think it's always important to, for me at least, to make the point, when we talk about country level or even UN level, climate action, regulation, legislation, it's honestly, it feels always a bit like out there and not really tangible, right? Because what is a country, what is a government anyways, and what is the UN actually doing? and what can they actually be doing. So I think it's always important to understand when we talk about this year, for example, these new NDCs, the nationally determined contributions on the country level, or any implications from the ICJ case tomorrow. Nothing is going to happen if the private sector is not moving. That's pretty much for me the quintessence there. Like there will be then trickle-down effects that affect the private sector. Otherwise, they can't really enforce whatever will be decided or comes out of the opinion piece tomorrow. So I think it's really important when states receive clearer legal obligations from the ICJ, they will inevitably translate these into domestic legislation and regulation, right? Otherwise, there's a kind of a gap there. So I think this understanding is honestly often missing, even or especially in the private sector space, that when there's something going on over there, they will feel it at least a few years later, the latest. I'll come back to this in a bit. So what could be such implications? So I want to kind of approach it from that angle, and maybe either you have people here from the private sector, or you want to call your best friend tomorrow and tell them, guys, there might be something here for you you want to be aware of. So one is very important about supply chain and due diligence obligations. So again, if the states will be held accountable for their actions or for kind of the implications on around climate change, this will have implications, especially for large multinational businesses and their supply chain due diligences. So pretty much assessing and addressing the climate impacts throughout their value chains. And if we just know a few companies that I work with, they have global value chains, right? So they will have a huge task at hand then when states mandate more disclosure and more assessment there. I think also one thing that could be very new, not in that sense, but new if it was to be translated into legislation, is the link between climate action and human rights obligations, because that is something that is right now not as transparent, similar to, which is not really fully in here, but similar to all the nature and biodiversity implications that often are being kind of ignored while we focus on quote unquote only emissions for corporates, for example. So supply chain due diligence and especially the link to human rights, that could be something that is coming down the pipe then for organizations. On the not legal side, I think it's also very, very important to mention what could be so if the decision tomorrow, if the opinion tomorrow makes a clearer link that states have an obligation to protect the climate system, this could also strengthen the arguments that corporate leaders have an equal or corresponding duties themselves. So meaning it could actually redefine a bit the fiduciary duty and investment framework for the private sector, which I think could be very interesting. So I always like to end on and emphasize opportunities here in all of the change, because I do believe, and again, working with a lot of businesses together, yes, there might be a bit of a scare and uncertainty, but there's also always huge opportunity from such uncertainty. So I think there's a real momentum here for proactive leadership. So companies that do align proactively, anticipate already the outcomes and legal developments before they become mandatory, they can gain competitive advantages, they improve stakeholder relations, they reduce future compliance costs, definitely, and ultimately also contribute to climate justice for future generations, which honestly I hear more and more, especially from senior leaders who almost want to leave behind a legacy. And I think I'm very happy to exploit this drive that they show in the later stages of their careers to say, great, you have achieved a lot of things in the business world. Now, what can you do actually beyond it? And I think there could be real momentum here for those of us who work with the private sector to prepare them and to nudge them to be more proactive and to be prepared for potential implications of this. And even if it wasn't to go that far, using this momentum to say, guys, there is something here that you should be prepared for, and actually an opportunity for you to differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack, so to speak. So really looking forward to how we can work also, especially with the private sector, off the back of tomorrow's decision.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. I think a hugely important point there you made earlier on around translating the findings down to sort of domestic legislation and equally the fundamental role of the private sector, and how in lots of spaces they've been moving much faster than government, which didn't used to be the case. And it's sort of the tables have turned, and yeah, there's a huge role there for the private sector to move things forward. Nadia, please, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. What I wanted to really speak about is the unprecedented moment that we're in with tomorrow's ICJ opinion. And so I just wanted to also give you background about myself. I am a law professor at Barry University in Orlando, Florida. I'm also a PhD candidate in environmental studies at Yale. And so my work operates at the intersection of environmental law, climate justice, and emerging technology. So whether it's building a climate technology that leverages artificial intelligence for disaster response, or being part of a global coalition for advocating for the UN resolution for a right to a healthy environment. I also am someone who has served as an elected member of the Democratic National Committee in the United States and works with frontline communities on climate resilience. And so I really wanted to talk about the urgent need for translating the legal framework into actionable work. And so the question that I see is that whether we have the legal institutional imagination as well as the moral courage to operationalize whatever guidance the court provides tomorrow. And advisory opinions carry substantial persuasive authority in both domestic and international legal systems, but they require, as I stated earlier, translational advocacy, which means converting authoritative legal interpretation into enforceable obligations through national courts, legislative processes, and civil society mobilization. And so what this really requires is 3 immediate preparations that need to happen, and that is strategic litigation coordination that builds upon the court's reasoning as it would be delivered, as well as interpretive development across legal traditions. So, for example, with the Islamic jurisprudence tradition has the principle of maslaha, and this provides a sophisticated framework for collective climate obligations, as well as for the preparation of institutional resistance where youth climate litigations can be essential. So what we've seen, whether from Vanuatu to Montana, youth cleanups have really transformed climate law by asserting rights-based claims that transcend traditional barriers. And so this litigation strategy has provided a template for operationalizing whatever obligations the ICJ clarifies. So for example, with the climate litigation in the United States, it led to historic climate impacts during the Biden administration in the form of legislation with the Inflation Reduction Act. And so I also need to kind of recognize that we can't just limit ourselves to judicial remedies. We also have to recognize the work of electoral politics has a really important avenue for operationalizing climate obligations. So as we've seen from recent mayoral primaries in New York and Minneapolis, this shows you how local electoral politics can also accelerate climate action implementation. For example, the New York's mayoral race also showcased very competing climate visions. So whether it was about resilience infrastructure to ambitious decarbonization timelines. And so we can also see that the victor's platform will directly shape how international obligations translate into concrete policy for millions of residents. And so similarly, Minneapolis also voters weighed candidates' climate justice commitments. And so this matters because you see the emergence of the climate voter. And also because cities consume about 78% of global energy and produce over 70% of carbon emissions. So whatever obligations tomorrow's decision clarifies, it's also going to require municipal implementation through millions of policy decisions that will be made by locally accountable officials. And so mayors possess enormous discretionary power, whether it's zoning for renewable energy, procurement driving clean technology, or building codes that mandate efficiency standards. And what youth advocates have been able to do is to really understand this multi-pronged approach. So whether it's through the electoral organizing or endorsing climate champions or registering young voters, this really operates alongside the litigation strategy, and that they recognize court victories mean nothing without political leadership committed to that implementation. And what we also see is that the current trajectory suggests that tens of millions of people will die by mid-century from climate disasters and displacement. We have exhausted the carbon budget by just seeking out gradualist approaches, and every month of delay compounds future harm and prevents injustice. And so we have to recognize the fundamental reality that our current systems are not going to sustain the planetary crisis. The economic, political, and social structures that created this emergency cannot survive the physical consequences that they have unleashed. Climate collapse will force systemic transformation, whether we plan for it or not. And so the issue is whether we can shape the transformation proactively through legal and electoral action, or whether we will allow it to unfold chaotically through crisis and breakdown. And so we have to build legal frameworks for climate displacement that dwarf historical refugee movements, as well as create mechanisms for loss and damage at a civilizational scale, as well as establish accountability systems for when territories become uninhabitable. And so young activists have really understood this dual imperative better than even most legal scholars. Greta Thunberg has provided moral clarity. Pacific Island students have really focused on this rights-based advocacy, and young plaintiffs have really shown that constitutional strategies can demonstrate the innovation that can emerge from moral conviction. And so this urgency demands coordinated deployment of all available mechanisms at our disposal. And so whether it's tort liability for climate deception, securities enforcement for disclosure failures, administrative challenges to inadequate agency action, or constitutional litigation asserting fundamental rights. But all of this also has to happen hand in hand with electoral mobilization to install leaders who will implement whatever the legal obligations that emerge. And so as I finish up, tomorrow's decision really is important for a renewed campaign for planetary justice. Young climate advocates have really shown us the tools and the moral framework, whether it's in the courtrooms or at the ballot box. But what remains is really the scaling of their insights with the urgency that our planetary moment demands. The climate system operates according to physical laws indifferent to legal sophistication. Every day's delay in implementing tomorrow's decision will compound injustice visited upon future generations. And there is truly no rest for the wicked, and we have all been complicit in this great wickedness unless we really act as much as we can. And so our work really starts tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Hugely rich and important and sobering at the same time. I think what really struck out in particular for me is around how climate change is going to force systems transformation, whether we like it or not. So like now is our time to act and help make sure that we shape it in a way that leads to a more just and sustainable world, because if we don't shape it, the alternative is going to be one that is not really bear thinking about. And maybe before I come back to you with a question, maybe to go all the way back to Maya, just on a question that Bob Flax has actually put in the chat. His question is, individual nations have mechanisms to enforce legal decisions, but one of the problems is that there is no parallel on the international level. What kind of enforcement mechanisms available under international law, especially in the area of climate protection, are there? I think that's over to you, Maya, if you're happy to take on that.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of an answer in the chat, and others can pipe up. But I think this is like a really key fundamental deficit in the international system, basically the lack of building out the implementation and enforcement, like a true international judicial architecture for the international community. And so I've been writing for past 5 years or so on this very issue, like across our international legal institutions. The ICJ hasn't been updated, had an upgrade for 80 years, a substantial one, for example, amongst International Criminal Court, also very, very weak enforcement in many respects, relying on individual state cooperation. So basically what we have proposed as like a short-term measure at the Climate Governance Commission is building on the accountability mechanisms that are now embedded in the Paris Agreement and UNFCCC International Legal Regime complex, And those would be a step forward, but they wouldn't be, I would say, like a true sort of international enforcement architecture yet. So this is also why we're considering the International Environment Court. And we're now working with some excellent international legal experts on starting to fashion, what could be this institution. And the enforcement architecture would be one of the fundamental issues that we'd really have to dig into. And just FYI, I've been working on the past couple of years this new International Anti-Corruption Court proposal, and we have a draft statute. And I've really pushed the lawyers involved in that to take the next steps to have much more genuine accountability and enforcement mechanisms in such an institution built into for all states that are parties. And we've made some progress, but it's challenging even for international lawyers to really think more boldly in this respect and creatively, even though we have a lot of examples at the domestic level of how we enforce the laws that are on the books. We have those models we could then, fashion very technically, creatively at the international level. So again, much work to be done. And this is part of the reason why we're involved in the commission, is to how do we actually build out the international legal and institutional architecture to be a proper governance system, a proper legal system.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maya. And maybe building on that for a question for Alex. I mean, you obviously spoke about the role of business in the private sector, and we've heard a lot about the importance of now scaling up sort of action in many respects. And so the way you spoke about business in the private sector was quite at a sort of domestic level and the need to translate things down to a domestic level. But how is the business and the private sector sort of looking at scaling up, working across jurisdictions, across sort of national boundaries? And where do you see the role of business networks in helping advance what needs to be done?
Yeah, and no, business networks, industry groups are highly, highly important. And I've just been to London, or just by now, almost a month ago, London Climate Action Week, and they have been hosting a workshop with, among others, the signatories of the Climate Pledge. So one of the biggest kind of organizations from, with 2040 targets. And the sentiment in the room was quite clear about how can we come together, collaborate pre-competitively. I think that's something we hear over and over again. And I mentioned supply chains. Supply chains are not domestic. Supply chains are spanning the globe. So companies will be faced inevitably, once they have a global supply chain, with laws, regulation across multiple jurisdictions. So they will have to figure this out one way or another. And the sentiment that I feel right now in the whole private sector is definitely one of, we have to do this together. They realize increasingly so we can't do this alone. So both among industry groups, among sector groups, among the peers, but then also with relation to government. So one example is I'm leading a project with the organization Exponential Roadmap, where we are looking at bottlenecks in decarbonizing or kind of enacting on a private transition plan due to lack of policies in certain jurisdictions. So an example could be Brazil, because there's also the COP being hosted this year. In Brazil, there is a lack of sustainable kind of forestry or agriculture regulation and environment. So companies have a hard time to work with their local suppliers or actually to source from the region to begin with in absence of these laws. Another example could be Taiwan or South Korea, where oftentimes companies are faced with a lack of access to renewable energy. So they can't help their suppliers to decarbonize, to become green, quote unquote, if the governments don't support them with local infrastructure, for example, and regulation in turn. So there are multiple levels of dependencies here, but the sentiment clearly is towards we need to work together, private sector within the sector, but also then across with the public sector.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. And moving swiftly on, also quite conscious of time, but Nadia, one of the things that you spoke about, which I found particularly interesting, is obviously around engaging with electoral politics across different levels. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the role of civil society in that. I mean, and shifting the public narrative, or the role of different groups, the youth groups, as we just speak a bit to that sort of capturing the public's imagination and perspective?
I think really the heart of electoral organizing is building coalitions. And so this idea that if you show up for other people, they'll show up for you. And that's, I think, been really critical in terms of climate organizing, where you see synergies across different issues, whether it's immigration rights or prison rights. I think that you're also looking at the issues that overlap relating to, for example, housing justice or labor organizing. And that you can also see that the youth climate movement also understands that this as a principle. And so there's this sense that there's reciprocal solidarity, and that provides a strategic initiative in terms of how climate organizing happens going forward. And I think that's what you're going to see from the decision tomorrow, is that that the coalition work that has been done leads to strong outcomes.
Brilliant, and a hugely clear and important answer. I think there's links to maybe a couple of the themes that are coming up in the questions, and I'll maybe just throw sort of 3 of them out to the panel for the panel to come back as you wish, and then we can also move to sort of closing remarks as well, just thinking of time. But one of the things that's come up is around faith groups and the faith community, and this is actually part of the title of the webinar, and not something that we've touched upon a lot. But where does that sort of group and community come in? What role is there in the interlink between the sort of climate space and the faith group? Secondly, there was been a question around the pact for the future. So this is again, looking to looking back in respect to the summit of the future and looking forward to the mechanisms of how that pact is going to be implemented. Do we see the interlinks there with the advisory opinion tomorrow? Are there opportunities that we can build on? And another questions that have been coming up is around, again, this sort of environmental rights groups, especially those in different countries. And I think there was a particular question around those in India and China. What role do they have to play? What advice would we give them off the back of the advisory opinion tomorrow? So the things about faith groups, environmental rights groups, and then linking more to that sort of international political dialogue around the pact. So throwing it open to anyone that would like to come in, and also a reminder to the panel to think about what your closing 1-minute fire round will be at the end. Welcome to unmute, or I'll pick on someone to kick us off on any of those questions. I think, Maya, I see you writing, so you might need to give us a first view on maybe the pact for the future or engagement with faith groups and other environmental rights groups.
Yeah, for faith groups, I think there's a lot of potential there. And Mobilizing Earth Governance Alliance, MEGA, and this declaration, Alan, that you have helped to put together and shared, I think it's really important if faith groups can help to mobilize, for example, with movements like for the ICJ, AO, et cetera, and focus on really concrete ethics-based issues for the international community, because really at the heart of our challenges international are absolutely fundamental ethical challenges. So now should be the time of faith groups to be really outspoken and clear and united across various faith traditions. So there's a lot of potential there. It's still not actualized. And then some of the future, lots of hooks to kind of take forward, and our colleagues at the Stimson Center are working really hard on how do we have a pact implementation sort of plan and to catalyze that. But from our experience with Mobilizing Earth Governance Alliance and other initiatives, really having small groups of like-minded states that again are really united around core values, core asks, like Vanuatu did with collaborators, partners. Having those really focused strategic smart coalitions are really important. They can, of course, dock onto or connect to parts of the pact and other international declarations, instruments, but to really have, clear objectives, focus, that ethical core, the ethical ask, to really push the international community forward, I think are very, very important. And just lastly, India, China, we have amazing commissioners on the commission from India, from China, extraordinary, who are so committed to international collaboration, so committed also to accountability framing. So I think we have huge constituencies in those two countries to work with around shared international values and commitments, and just to really try to keep pushing across diverse countries, geographies.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maya. Maybe, Henrique, if I could ask you maybe partly on the faith community's question, but also on the rights of future generations and how you see that movement linking with the follow-up from the ICJ.
Yes, thank you. Particularly on the right of future generations, we certainly hope, first of all, that the advisory opinion will also advance this field of research, since it's like emerging still in its cornerstones, I want to say, and we do really see this as a powerful narrative as well, to understand how we should consider the action that we are in fact implementing, or the action that we are pursuing, and to consider not only ourselves but also those who will come afterwards, and as I said before, solidarity, but also to acknowledge our responsibility to ensure that there is a common baseline that also the generations which are to come afterwards can inherit from us. And I think that's sort of also responds then to how, for example, faith-based communities could engage with this question to ensure that we really highlight this interconnectedness of past, present, and future, and to have a holistic approach to the way we govern this crisis. And I think also in terms of concrete contributions, I think most importantly it's to clarify what is your standpoint, how do you feel affected by this crisis, and to really seek out a clear sort of objective that you would like to advocate for, and break that down into like concrete action steps that you can take towards this, as Nadia has clearly identified as well, these concrete ways of engaging with, be it politicians, or also in strategic litigation. It could also be an opinion piece. It can be, like some alignment with similar groups who share your beliefs and ideas on the kind of action that we need to pursue, and to start a petition, for example. So there are many, many ways in which different kinds of tools can be leveraged and in which your voice can be heard. But most importantly, I think do it together.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, a lot of coming back to this idea of community building, coalition building, and doing it together. Alex, Nadia, Malcolm, would you like to say anything to those questions or other questions? I mean, thank you very much, Malcolm, for doing a lot of the answering in the Q&A boxes. For those that haven't noticed, you can look at the answers that Malcolm's put if you toggle over onto the other tab. But is there anything you'd like to add to any of those questions? And then after that, we'll move to a quick fire round from each of the panelists.
Yeah, just in terms of the faith-based communities, for us, in terms of the engagement, and I think the others have answered that really well. But in terms of this whole discourse of paradigm of fostering good stewardship, and their sets of networks as far as the constituencies by which they engage with across all different levels of society. I think that's the strength as far as faith-based communities are concerned in advocating and taking this whole advisory opinion is concerned. So I think just thought I'll throw it there. And I wanted to. I was typing some response to Rebecca's question about this whole concern about the transparency and as far as the consultation from the bench and the IPCC. I just wanted to say I wasn't sort of aware of that, but maybe it's a sort of a missed opportunity of some sorts. But I think it might lend itself to ensuring that in future especially with the court's practice, because this was very much, you know, a big case in itself, and quite a number of the court's practice, I would say, has been maybe challenged. But I think it, in a way, it'll lend itself to improving the court's conduct and the way it will, you know, handle future cases. I think I'll just sort of mention that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for those that want to see Rebecca's question, if you go into the answered group, you can see the her original question and Malcolm's response. Nadia, Alex, anything that you would like to add? And then we'll go to not even a 1 minute round, but a 1 sentence. But Nadia, over to you.
Yeah, I think I would just want to add in that faith-based communities and environmental rights groups are natural allies, but I don't think we've done the full level of intentional bridge building that needs to happen. And so essentially it's an untapped resource. And so I think that we really need to move from having this aspirational goal, aspirational linkage, to having an actual linkage. And so, and I think that the faith communities bring a lot of moral authority and massive membership bases in organizing infrastructure, and the environmental groups bring technical expertise and policy frameworks. And so that's, I think, a very valuable in terms of having this protection for this idea of creation.
Brilliant, thank you. And Alex, any last comments to add?
No, I'm happy to kick off the wrap up in just a minute.
Great.
But I don't want to interrupt if anyone else wants to add.
I think, Alex, over to you for your one-line key takeaway, and then we'll do a tour de table before closing out.
No, thank you. Happy to kick this off. So I think for me, important is, no matter what the outcome of tomorrow, that we take this as the launch pad for further collaborative action. The private sector, public sector, we have to break down the silos, which I feel like we're way too often still operating in. And again, no matter what's the outcome, I think we need to take this as a catalyst for further and more ambitious action that we can actually achieve and realize may come true together across the sectors, across the jurisdictions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. And Henrique, I'll go to you next.
Thank you. I think we would just like to reemphasize, also as Maya said, this case is really a testimony to what we can achieve as a global community and as individuals who seek out their communities. And this really showcases how we should be working together using the existing legal, political, and civil society pathways that we have at our disposal, but also as a starting point for thinking beyond the current structures and systems that we have in place and leveraging new collective action pathways. So yeah, let's lose this momentum tomorrow, and hopefully see many of you at the Peace Palace tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, and best of luck tomorrow. We look forward to hopefully seeing your photos on social media or wherever they are. Maya, over to you.
Yes, just again, a thanks to Vanuatu and World Youth for Climate Justice for showing us how it's done with such, harmony and collaboration and skill and vision. And may we take this forward. May this be a turning point for the international community, affirming fairness law that applies to all, that we should govern international affairs through reason, equity, justice, et cetera. And let's keep pushing. We absolutely must keep pushing. And just one thing about Gandhi talked about the power of truth, which I think law is archetypally should be an exercise in truthful analysis and reason to again examine these issues of justice, equity, fairness, and the protection of the common good. So let's just take this forward.
Brilliant. I like the hope. Nadia, please, over to you for your final remarks.
I would say that when you combine environmental expertise with faith-based moral authority, as well as authentic coalition work, you can create political power as well as judicial power to bring and implement climate justice at every level.
Excellent, thank you. And Malcolm, over to you for the final words.
Yes, thank you very much. I would again Vanuatu's appreciations and gratefulness as far as the support from the faith-based communities, the youth, environmental interest groups. I think it has been instrumental in picking momentum and building the critical mass so that we can change the trajectory. And this advisory opinion, we see it as the pathway to bridge that gap between climate commitments, meaningful action, and importantly, advancing climate justice. And thank you once again.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone on the panel for joining, and thank you everyone that's tuned in to listen and for all your questions and engagement. And yeah, we're on the eve of what will hopefully be a watershed moment, as we've heard, and a lot of work yet to do, but a lot of hope in what we can achieve together. So just a huge thank you to everyone. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully continuing the conversation, and let's see what comes out tomorrow. So thank you. Was that all?